The first frost of the season came early to the Dakota Territory that October of 1893, and it came hard, the kind of cold that crept into a man's boots before he even noticed the sky had turned gray. Ezra Colton walked into Pryor's general store in the town of Willow Creek, carrying his daughter Daisy against his shoulder, 2 years old and burning with fever, her small breath coming in short, rattling pulls that terrified him more than any storm ever had. He had exactly 11 cents in his pocket and a debt already owed at the counter he had no way to pay. He did not yet know that before he walked back out through that door, the richest woman in the county would say something that would leave him standing frozen in the cold morning light, unable to speak. Behind a shelf of dry goods, half hidden in shadow, stood Josephine Ashford, watching the way he carried that child, and something in her chest that had gone quiet 4 years ago, stirred for the first time since her own daughter's grave, had gone cold beneath the prairie grass. Ezra Colton had once run a modest freight operation out of Bismarck, 3 good wagons and a contract hauling supplies to the railroad camps, until a fire in the stable took 2 of those wagons and every horse he owned in a single terrible night. His wife Charlotte had died 8 months later, worn down by a winter fever that took hold of her lungs and never let go, and Ezra had buried her with his own hands because he could not spare the coin to pay a man to dig. Since then, he had drifted west with Daisy on his back, taking day labor where he could find it, sleeping in barns when a farmer took pity, and under open sky when none did. 6 miles outside Willow Creek, Josephine Ashford had spent that same gray morning walking the empty halls of the largest ranch house in the territory, a house her late husband Nathaniel had built before a mining accident in the Black Hills took him from her 4 years earlier, the same year, almost to the month, that their only daughter Grace had succumbed to diphtheria at the age of 6. Josephine owned more cattle and more grazing land than any rancher within 200 miles, and she had not, in 4 years, found a single reason that mattered to walk those empty halls with any purpose at all. She wore a light blue traveling dress that morning, the color of a sky before snow, and she had come into town for nothing more urgent than thread, though something had told her, without quite explaining why, that she ought to make the trip herself instead of sending a hired girl. Ezra reached the counter with Daisy's fever-hot cheek pressed against his neck, and the storekeeper, a narrow, humorless man named Silas Pryor, looked up from his ledger with the flat, unwelcoming expression of a man who had already decided the answer before the question was asked. "You still owe $6 from last month, Colton," Pryor said, not bothering to soften it. "I can't extend you another cent of credit, not with winter coming and my own family to feed." Ezra's jaw tightened, but his voice, when it came, held none of the anger a lesser man might have let slip. "I'm not asking for credit, Mr. Pryor," he said. "I'm asking for milk and a bit of broth for my girl. She's had the fever 3 days now and hasn't kept a meal down. I'll work it off. Whatever labor you need done around this store, chopping wood, hauling stock, anything at all. I don't need a place to sleep and I don't need coin in my pocket." He looked down at Daisy, and something in his composure cracked just slightly at the edges. "Feed my daughter and I'll ask for nothing else, sir. Not for myself. I'd sleep in the cold 100 nights running before I'd ask for anything for me." Pryor's expression did not soften. "Charity's not a business, Colton," he said, closing his ledger with a hard, final snap. "I run a store, not a poorhouse. You'll need to find your milk elsewhere." Ezra's shoulders dropped, the particular exhaustion of a man who has heard some version of that sentence in every town along his road so far, and he turned toward the door, murmuring an apology to Daisy that she was too fevered to hear. It was the sight of his back, straight despite the refusal, that finally moved Josephine Ashford out from behind the shelf of dry goods. "Mr. Pryor," she said, and her voice, clear and unhurried, cut through the store's cold silence like a struck match. The storekeeper's entire posture changed the instant he recognized her. "Mrs. Ashford," he said, straightening quickly, "I didn't see you come in. How can I help you this morning?" Josephine did not look at him. She kept her eyes fixed on Ezra, who had stopped at the door, one hand still on the frame, watching her with the wary confusion of a man who has learned not to trust sudden kindness. "Give this man whatever milk and broth his daughter needs," Josephine said, and put it on my account, along with whatever debt he already owes you." Pryor's mouth opened and closed once before he managed a response. "Ma'am, that's a generous offer, but I don't think—" "I wasn't asking your opinion, Mr. Pryor," Josephine said, still gentle, still unhurried, but with an edge beneath it that left no room for argument. Ezra stepped back from the door, disbelief plain on his exhausted face. "Ma'am, I can't accept that," he said. "I told you I'll work for it. I don't take handouts." Josephine turned to face him fully, and for the first time since he had walked in, her composure wavered just slightly, some private grief crossing behind her eyes before she pushed it back down. "This isn't a handout, Mr. Colton," she said. "It's help from one parent who understands, better than most, exactly what it costs to lose a child to a fever no one could stop in time. Your pride can argue with me all it likes on the walk to my ranch. Right now, that little girl needs warmth and broth more than you need to owe no one a debt." Ezra stared at her, his exhaustion and his stubborn pride waging a silent war across his face. Daisy stirred against his shoulder, letting out a thin, weak cough that seemed to decide the matter for him faster than any argument could have. "I don't understand," he said quietly. "You don't know me, ma'am. You don't owe me a single thing." Josephine held his gaze steadily. "I know you asked a storekeeper for broth instead of coin," she said. "I know you'd rather sleep in the cold 100 nights than take a single thing for yourself. I've learned to read desperate men quickly in this territory, Mr. Colton, and I've learned the difference between the kind who take advantage and the kind who'd rather starve than ask twice." What the widow did next left him in shock, though he did not yet have the words to describe it, standing there in the cold store with Daisy's fever burning through his coat. Silas Pryor hurried to gather milk, dried broth stock, and a warm wool blanket from the shelf behind him, and Josephine watched Ezra's resistance finally crack, a single exhausted tear cutting a track down his weathered cheek before he could stop it. "I have nothing to repay you with," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Then repay me by keeping her warm," Josephine said. "That is the only payment I require of you today." Outside, the cold had sharpened, and Josephine's carriage stood waiting at the hitching post. Her driver, an older man named Thomas Marsh, watching the exchange with the quiet, unsurprised patience of someone who had served the Ashford family long enough to recognize the particular way grief sometimes woke itself back up. "My carriage will take you and your daughter home, Mr. Colton," Josephine said, "wherever that may be." Ezra hesitated, the gap between their two worlds suddenly as wide and impassable as the territory itself. "We've been sleeping in the old Hollister barn on the edge of town," he admitted, shame coloring his voice. "It's no place for a lady's carriage, ma'am." Josephine's expression did not change. "A carriage is only wood and leather and wheels," she said. "It goes wherever it's told to go. Get in, Mr. Colton, before that wind turns any colder." Ezra climbed in beside her, holding Daisy close, sitting stiffly on the fine cushioned seat as though afraid to leave a mark on it. As the carriage rolled out of Willow Creek, Josephine studied the barn they eventually reached, a structure with more gaps in its walls than solid boards, and something in her chest tightened with a fury she had not expected to feel over a stranger's circumstances. "This will not do," she said quietly, more to herself than to him. "Not for a sick child, not through a Dakota winter." That evening, back at her own ranch house, Josephine sat alone in her study long after the fire had burned low, staring at a door down the hall that had remained closed for 4 years. She rose finally, crossed the silent hall, and turned the handle, stepping into a room she had not entered since the week they buried Grace. A small rag doll still sat propped against the pillow of the narrow bed, and a child's coat still hung on its hook behind the door. For one long, frightening moment, Josephine wondered whether the impulse pulling her toward Ezra Colton and his fevered daughter was born of genuine kindness or simply a desperate need to fill a silence that had never once, in 4 years, grown any quieter. "No," she whispered into the empty room. "No child could ever replace Grace. But loving her memory doesn't require me to turn away from a girl who needs help right now." She closed the door gently behind her, and by morning, she had made a decision that would set half of Willow Creek talking before the week was out. She sent Thomas back to the Hollister barn with a written offer the next day, and when Ezra read it, standing in the cold morning light with Daisy's fever finally beginning to break, his hands shook so badly he had to read it twice. Josephine was offering him the old foreman's cottage on the north edge of her ranch, a small stone structure with a working hearth and a garden plot gone wild with neglect, along with steady wages to maintain her grounds and mend her fences through the winter. It was not charity, the letter made plain. It was employment, fair and earned, with a full week to inspect the cottage and decide before he owed her anything at all. When Ezra arrived at the ranch gate that afternoon, Josephine met him on the wide porch steps. "You've already done too much," he said, echoing the same stubborn refusal she had heard from him in the store. "I won't live on your land as another charity case, ma'am." Josephine's chin lifted, the same firm gesture that had cut through Silas Pryor's protests the day before. "You won't be a charity case," she said. "You'll be an employee, same as any other on this ranch, and if your work isn't satisfactory, I'll dismiss you same as I would anyone else. Inspect the cottage first, Mr. Colton. Take the week. If the arrangement doesn't suit you, you may walk away owing me nothing." For the first time since she had met him, the corner of Ezra's mouth almost lifted. "Why are you doing this for us?" he asked. "You don't even know me." Josephine looked past him toward Daisy, asleep now and finally breathing easy in Thomas's arms. "I know what it costs to lose a child," she said quietly, "and your daughter deserves a real hearth, a real window, and the chance to see spring come without a fever chasing her through it." Ezra looked at his sleeping daughter for a long moment, then back at the cottage nestled among the cottonwoods. "I'll work for every dollar," he said finally, and only then did he accept the key from her outstretched hand. The cottage itself, when Ezra first stepped inside with Daisy still asleep against his shoulder, smelled of dust and cold stone, but the hearth drew easily once he coaxed a fire, and by nightfall the small front room had begun to feel less like an abandoned structure and more like something that might, with time, become a home. He laid Daisy on the narrow bed near the fire and sat beside her through most of that first night, watching her fever finally begin to break in small, hopeful increments, her breathing easing from the ragged pulls that had frightened him in the store to something closer to an ordinary child's sleep. By the second morning, she opened her eyes fully for the first time in 4 days and asked, in a small, rusty voice, whether there was anything to eat, and Ezra laughed for the first time in longer than he could remember, a sound that startled even himself in the quiet cottage. He carried her out onto the porch step, wrapped in every blanket he owned, and let her watch the frost melt slowly off the garden plot, and something in his chest, clenched tight since Charlotte's death, allowed itself to loosen just slightly for the first time in a very long while. The weeks that followed filled with quiet, steady labor, and with the particular kind of gossip that spreads fastest through small towns in winter. Women at the Willow Creek sewing circle whispered that the widow Ashford had taken in a gutter drifter and his sickly child, that she had surely lost her senses, that a man like that would rob her blind the moment her guard dropped. Josephine ignored every word of it. She found herself walking to the cottage most afternoons under the excuse of checking on Daisy's recovery, though the truth ran deeper than that with every visit. She brought small wooden toys and simple picture books. She watched Ezra repair the split rail fence with steady, rhythmic strikes of his hammer, watched the healthy color slowly return to both his face and his daughter's. During that first month, Ezra accepted nothing beyond his agreed wages. When Josephine left a basket of preserves at his door, he returned half of it the following morning with a short note explaining that Daisy had plenty already. When Thomas mistakenly overpaid him by a full $1 one week, Ezra walked through the frost to return it before sundown. Josephine had spent years surrounded by men who praised her wealth while quietly calculating what they might extract from it. Ezra never once asked what she owned. He only asked what needed doing. Late one afternoon in mid-November, a gray wolf came down out of the hills and took a calf from the herd grazing nearest the cottage, and Josephine's foreman rode out at first light, demanding the animal be hunted and killed before it cost the ranch further stock. Ezra volunteered without being asked, tracking the wolf's trail through fresh snow, while Josephine, against her foreman's strong objection, insisted on riding with him rather than waiting anxiously at the main house. They found the animal near dusk, and Ezra brought it down clean with a single shot from a distance, refusing to let the moment turn to spectacle or boasting the way some of the ranch hands might have. Riding back toward the cottage afterward, Josephine studied him in the fading light, this quiet, careful man who had defended her herd without once asking for credit or reward. And she understood, with sudden clarity, that she had stopped thinking of him as an employee weeks ago without quite noticing the shift. "You could have let my foreman handle it," she said. "I don't like sending other men to finish what I'm capable of finishing myself," Ezra replied simply, and Josephine found she had no argument to offer against that at all. One evening in late November, the first true snow of the season began to fall, thick and silent, and Josephine stayed later than usual at the cottage, sitting by the small hearth, while Daisy slept soundly in the next room for the first time without a single cough breaking the quiet. "I found this out by the creek," Ezra said, handing her a smooth riverstone shaped, almost perfectly, like a human heart. "I used to collect these for Charlotte," he said softly. "I wanted you to have this one." Josephine took the stone into her palm, her fingers brushing against his rough, calloused skin, and felt something stir in her chest that had lain dormant far longer than 4 years. "It isn't charity between us anymore, is it?" she said quietly, more statement than question. Ezra held her gaze in the firelight. "No, ma'am," he said. "I don't rightly know what to call it, but it stopped being charity somewhere around the 3rd week." Josephine closed her fingers around the stone, and for the first time since Grace's death, she understood that she had something in her life again worth being afraid of losing. We are more than halfway through Josephine and Ezra's story now, and if their quiet, steady kindness has stirred something in you, take a moment to subscribe so you never miss the next tale from this same forgotten stretch of the Dakota frontier. What do you think is waiting for Ezra when word of his past finally catches up to him in Willow Creek? Tell us in the comments what you believe Josephine will risk to protect this family she never expected to find. Now, back to the Dakota Territory, where a stranger was already riding toward Willow Creek with a folded notice tucked inside his coat. The trouble arrived on a bitterly cold morning in December, when a deputy from Bismarck rode into Willow Creek asking after a man named Ezra Colton, wanted on suspicion of arson connected to the very stable fire that had destroyed his freight business 2 years earlier. The insurance investigators, it seemed, had only recently reopened the case, and a witness had come forward claiming to have seen Ezra near the stable that night with a lantern in hand. Word reached the ranch before Ezra himself even knew a warrant existed, carried by a breathless Thomas Marsh who had heard it from the Willow Creek sheriff over coffee that morning. Josephine found Ezra at the fence line, hammer in hand, and watched the color drain entirely from his face when she told him. "I was there that night," Ezra admitted, his voice hollow. "I went to check on the horses before the fire started. I saw the flames and I ran, ma'am, same as any man would. I never once thought to explain myself to anyone, because I never imagined I'd need to." Josephine's chin lifted, the fear in her eyes hardening quickly into resolve. "Then we'll explain it now," she said. "Together." 2 deputies arrived at the ranch gate the following afternoon, Silas Pryor trailing behind them on his own horse, unable to resist witnessing the spectacle firsthand. "There he is," one deputy said, nodding toward Ezra, who stood his ground at the fence rather than run, Daisy's small hand gripping his trouser leg tightly. "Mr. Colton, you're wanted for questioning in Bismarck regarding a fire 2 years past." Daisy began to cry, clutching harder at her father's leg, and Ezra knelt to steady her before rising to face the deputies fully. "I'll come without trouble," he said quietly. "But I never set that fire. I lost 2 wagons and every horse I owned that night. I'd sooner have burned myself than my own livelihood." Josephine stepped forward before the deputies could move. "Before you take him anywhere," she said, "I want to know the name of this witness who claims to have seen him there." The deputies exchanged a glance, and one finally admitted, somewhat reluctantly, that the witness was a man named Harlan Vane, a former business rival of Ezra's who had bid unsuccessfully against him for the very same railroad freight contract the year before the fire. Josephine's eyes narrowed. "A rival witness, conveniently silent for 2 full years until now," she said. "That sounds less like justice to me, gentlemen, and rather more like a man settling an old score. The deputies took Ezra to the small Willow Creek jail regardless, unwilling to ignore an official warrant on a widow's suspicion alone, and Daisy sobbed against Josephine's shoulder as the cell door closed with a heavy final sound that echoed through the narrow stone hallway. The jail itself was a single cramped room behind the sheriff's office, iron bars separating a rough cot from a stove that barely held back the cold, and Ezra sat on the edge of that cot through the first long night listening to the wind outside and wondering, for the first time in years, whether he had finally run out of road entirely. Josephine did not go home. She spent that entire freezing night in the sheriff's front office with Daisy asleep in her lap, sending Thomas riding hard toward Bismarck at first light with a letter and a purse, heavy enough to hire the best lawyer the city had to offer. She sent a second rider toward the old railroad camp where Ezra's freight contract had once run, searching for any man who might remember the true circumstances of that long-ago fire. 2 days passed in an agony of waiting, Josephine refusing every suggestion from her own household staff that she return home and let the law handle matters on its own. "I will not leave that man alone in a cell while his daughter cries herself to sleep in my arms," she told Thomas flatly. "Not when I know exactly what that kind of abandonment does to a person who has already lost everything once before." On the third day, the lawyer Josephine had hired arrived from Bismarck with a foreman from the old railroad camp in tow, a weathered man named Gideon Pratt, who remembered the night of the fire with sudden startling clarity once shown Harlan Vane's sworn statement. "That's a lie," Pratt said flatly in the sheriff's office, loud enough for Harlan Vane, standing uncomfortably near the door, to hear every word. "I was on watch that night. Colton wasn't anywhere near that stable until after the flames had already taken hold. I saw him running toward it, trying to save the horses, not away from it with a lantern like this fool claims." The sheriff studied Harlan Vane's suddenly pale face for a long, silent moment. "You want to revise your statement, Mr. Vane," he said, "before I start asking why a man waits 2 years to remember seeing something like this." Vane's composure crumbled entirely under the weight of the room's attention, and within the hour he had confessed the whole sorry truth, that he had lied out of old bitterness over the lost freight contract, never expecting the accusation to be taken seriously so long after the fact. The cell door opened that same afternoon, and Ezra stepped out into gray winter daylight to find Josephine waiting on the jailhouse steps, Daisy running the moment she saw him, small arms wrapping tight around his legs. Ezra knelt and gathered his daughter close, and when he finally looked up at Josephine, standing there in her light blue coat with 3 sleepless nights plain on her face, something in his chest gave way entirely. "You stayed," he said, his voice rough with disbelief. "So did you," Josephine said simply. "Every single time it mattered." Ezra rose slowly, Daisy still cradled against his shoulder, and crossed the small distance between them. "I've spent most of my life running from things," he said quietly. "Running from a fire that took everything, running from a grief I never learned to outpace no matter how far west I walked. But standing in that cell these last 3 days, Josephine, I wasn't thinking about running anywhere at all. I was thinking about you and Daisy, and about the only home either of us has had since Charlotte died." Josephine's eyes filled with tears she no longer tried to hide. "Then don't run," she whispered. "Stay, Ezra, not as an employee. Stay as something real." He did not answer with words. He set Daisy gently on her feet, took Josephine's hands in his own, and kissed her there on the jailhouse steps in full view of half the town that had gathered to watch the accusation unravel. It was not a kiss of fleeting relief or courthouse spectacle. It was a kiss of promise, of survival, of 2 people who had each buried someone they loved and had somehow, against every hard frontier, found their way back to standing together in the daylight. Winter deepened across the Dakota plains after that, but inside the cottage on the North Ridge, the fire never once went cold, and there was food enough in the cellar and warmth enough in the hearth to carry them through the harshest months the territory could offer. Harlan Vane left Willow Creek quietly before the new year, his reputation ruined beyond repair, and Silas Pryor, who had refused Ezra credit that first cold morning, found himself extending an apology of his own before spring arrived, along with a standing offer of work whenever Ezra needed it. Josephine did not sell her ranch or abandon her fortune the way some grand gesture might have demanded. Instead, she quietly folded Ezra and Daisy into the life she had built there, deeding him the foreman's cottage outright once the accusation had fully cleared, and spending her days at his side rather than alone in the echoing halls of the main house. Spring arrived slowly that year, the wildflowers blooming first along the creek bank where Ezra had found the heart-shaped stone, and Josephine and Ezra were married beneath the cottonwoods in a real ceremony this time, with wildflowers gathered by Daisy's own small hands and a fiddle player from the Willow Creek Saloon donating his afternoon for free, saying afterward that he had never seen two people look at each other quite the way they did that day. Daisy stood as flower girl in a new dress of fine blue wool, the very shade of the coat Josephine had worn on the jailhouse steps, and when the ceremony ended, she ran to Josephine without prompting and called her mama for the very first time, small arms thrown around her waist with complete, uncomplicated certainty. Josephine froze entirely still, one hand pressed to her heart, tears spilling freely down her face before she knelt and gathered Daisy into her arms, holding her the way she had once dreamed of holding a daughter of her own again, in a house that had finally, truly stopped being empty. Years later, travelers passing through Willow Creek still spoke of the Ashford Ranch, though most had long since started calling it something simpler: the Colton place, the family with the warmest hearth in the county for any traveler who came knocking hungry. They no longer spoke with the cautious whispers of that first frozen autumn. They spoke with genuine wonder, the way people speak of something that had, against every hard lesson the frontier ever taught them, turned out right. One winter years afterward, a young father with an empty coat pocket and a hungry infant knocked at the cottage door well past dark, and it was Daisy, grown tall and steady, who answered first and called for her parents before the stranger had even finished his apology for the hour. Ezra and Josephine fed him without a single question asked, and later that night, watching Daisy tuck a spare blanket around the stranger's sleeping child with the same careful tenderness Josephine had once shown her, Ezra reached for his wife's hand across the table. "It started with a fever and 11 cents, Josephine liked to say to anyone who asked about it, and it ended with the truest family I ever thought I'd get to have." Above the mantel in the cottage, beside the heart-shaped riverstone worn smooth from years of handling, sat a small rag doll that had once belonged to a little girl named Grace, given now to Daisy with Josephine's full blessing. A memory allowed, finally, to become something gentler than grief. Family isn't always about the blood that runs in a person's veins. Sometimes it's about the people who see you at your very worst, exhausted, accused, and asking for nothing but a meal for your child, and choose, with everything they have, to stand beside you until the truth comes out. It's about the hard bargains desperate people strike simply to survive a Dakota winter, and the quiet grace that can turn those bargains into something that lasts a lifetime. If Ezra and Josephine's story stayed with you, tell us in the comments which moment moved you most: the milk in the general store, the 3 nights outside the jailhouse, or the little girl who called her mama for the very first time. Please like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who still believes kindness can outlast even the harshest accusation. In our next story, a wealthy widow hires a mysterious ranch hand to save her failing spread, only to discover he is running from a past that could either destroy her reputation or heal it completely. This is a fictional frontier romance inspired by the real hardships of the American West, and while it touches on grief, poverty, and the fear of false accusation, every difficult moment has been told with care and without graphic detail, brought to life here for your entertainment. Until the next trail, keep your fire burning and your heart open to the stranger at your gate. God bless the pioneers, and God bless the hearts that refuse to break.